We continue our countdown of the best prospect pools in the NHL, and we continue this with picks 26 through 24, the Oilers, the Rangers, and the Canucks, all coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. During the summertime, though, it's going to be 3 times a week. I'm Hadi joined by Sebastian and Hadi, and we're continuing our countdown of the best prospect pools in the NHL. We're down to teams 26 through 24. We're going to be talking about the Oilers, Rangers, and Canucks prospect pools in today's episode. But before we get into any of it, just make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. Now, for our first segment, before actually we get into any of this, we're recording this as of July 31st. And this morning, there were the exhibition games, the pre-tournament games for the Hlinka Gretzky Cup. We saw a lot of the 2024 NHL draft eligibles in action. I watched the Canada versus Finland game. Finland won that game 9-6, a coach's nightmare. And yeah, the defense looked rough, even though the defensemen themselves on Team Canada are very alluring. We've got guys like Sam Dickinson and Henry Muse and Zane Parekh, all very high-end 2024 NHL draft defensemen, but it was pretty rough to watch. A lot of those defensemen got beat. The goaltender in net for most of the game, Gabriel Daigle, was having a very rough game as well. And Finland was just a lot more efficient, a lot more cohesive, and a lot more effective in the way that they were producing offense. Whereas Canada was trying to get by on talent alone, and it wasn't working out. But yeah, I just wanted to give a little parenthesis on that. We're going to be having a bit more of these kind of snippets at the start of episodes regarding what the Hlinka Gretzky Cup is looking like as the month of August goes on. So let's get into it, Sebastian. We've got the Edmonton Oilers here for starters at 26. Now, for me, I think the main prospect that stands out in the pool, now that Dylan Holloway is considered a graduate, now that Philip Broberg is considered a graduate, would probably be Xavier Bourgault. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think I might put Beau Akey slightly ahead of him, but
Oh, yeah.
I'm happy to hear your piece on Bourgault.
Oh, I've always liked the progression, and I feel like even though there has been some sort of stagnation in the queue for a bit of a while, I feel like he's going to have a great opportunity to develop in the AHL and work his way up. Bourgault's just a fantastic stick handler. He's got a lot of on-puck skill. He's able to get involved defensively. He's able to put in that effort level. It's not to the level where it could be, and he certainly needs to up that kind of effort level and defensive game to be a regular NHLer, but the on-puck game, the skill set is really high-end. I really like the goal scoring and playmaking abilities as well. So for me, Akey is just, there's a clear pathway for him in the bottom 4 role as a defenseman. But for Bourgault, I see a bit more of a glimpse of kind of a top 6 player. Even though the production has stagnated and lagged behind, I still see that production as something that is realistically possible. Whereas with Akey, it's just from day one, we're looking at a player who projects really well. But, I mean, do you see him become a top pair, number 3 defenseman? I see him as at most a number 4, right?
I definitely think the most likely outcome is a bottom 3 defenseman. That said, I do think that his toolkit and his intelligence and his overall transition game, both offensively and defensively, are strong enough to potentially unlock higher upside as the years progress.
Yeah.
And I think guys like Akey and Matthew Mania and Cam Allen, if we're looking at like OHL defensemen that got picked later than I think they should have. Yeah. I think those are all players that could really, really like with their toolkits unlock that higher end upside. And I think Akey's the best of that bunch. So I do think there's an outside chance that he's a number 2 defenseman in the end, but it's a long shot. Which is also why Edmonton's lower down on our ranking here of teams. But that said, Akey's one of my favorite players to watch. He is He was probably the best rush defender in the entire draft class in 2023. Tremendous skater, really fluid. As the year went on, he was showing a lot more offensive engagement and creativity and dominance, really. So he's been really fun to watch and one of my favorites. But yeah, Bourgault is a player that I think I've kind of cooled on a little bit, and I was never the highest on him to begin with. Even in going back to his draft year season. That said, I think a third line like projection is totally reasonable. I'm not quite sold on the top 6 upside at this point in time. But that's kind of the moral of the story with a lot of the prospects in Edmonton's pool. There's a lot of players that are intriguing, but to me are kind of limited in some ways. Like Raphaël Lavoie has a really interesting toolkit, but has still not really been able to fully put it together. And he's been playing pro hockey for the last 3+ years. Carter Savoie I thought was excellent in the NCAA, and he really struggled against pro competition last season because the knock on him was always low engagement and quote unquote laziness or selfishness, which I thought progressed a ton in a positive way throughout his time in college hockey. But it really has bitten him against pro competition, where even the extra seconds of hesitation that he'd take on the puck in college that he'd get away with, he's not getting away with anymore. And he was not getting many minutes as a result. And Matvei Petrov is another player that I think is quite interesting. I've watched him quite a bit. I'm based in Ottawa, so I get to watch a lot of the OHL boys. And Petrov was really impressive as a D+1, scored 40 goals, 90 points. And I was really impressed with him as a true dual threat on the power play specifically. He was really learning how to deceive defenders with his dual threat. And I was really impressed. And last season, I thought that the goal scoring and that, I guess, intensity around the net kind of took a step back. He became a stronger playmaker, but I think his overall progression kind of stagnated a little bit as a D+2. That said, there's a ton of skill in this player, and I think that there is middle 6 upside. Those are more of a long shot than some of the other forwards we've mentioned so far.
No, for sure. And, there are a couple interesting-ish names in there, like Tyler Tullio and even Luka Munzenberger that we didn't mention, but it's for a good reason. I don't think either of us really kind of see much out of Munzenberger that's promising.
It's a great German name. I love it. But
yeah, and we love our German boys, but it's just it's tough to kind of project them as really anything at the NHL level. It's kind of a baffling pick to me. You got guys like Lane Peterson and Jaden Grube, who they acquired recently as well. There are a couple interesting names in there, Jake Chason, but nothing really that stands out and gives any promise in terms of at least a top 6 player. No one who you can plug into, realistically plug into a top 6 role or a top 4 defensive role sort of seamlessly and as comfortably as other prospects in other pools. So that's why we have them at 26. But that's for our first segment with Edmonton. Now we're going to be going into the Rangers prospect pool very soon. But before we get into that, Sebastian, who's our sponsor for today's episode?
Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first betting amount back in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. For just a $20 bet, you can land $200 in free bonus bets, win or lose, which you can use on anything from money lines to over and unders to who you think is going to swing the first home run of a game. All on an app that's safe, secure, easy to use, and best of all, you get your winnings instantly. There's no better place to bet MLB than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get up to $200 in free bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.
All right, so moving on to our second segment and team number 25 in our countdown of the best prospect pools in the NHL. We've got the New York Rangers. Now, the Rangers just recently added Gabe Perreault, who's a very polarizing player, which is very surprising because even among the public sphere, usually the guys in the public sphere like the very intelligent, very good playmaking, kind of undersized player who a lot of teams usually shy away from, but this year was kind of the opposite. We saw a lot of public boards and a lot of people who are in touch with the private sphere, the NHL teams, have him a lot higher in their rankings and in their projections than the public sphere. So for Gabe Perreault, what's the main difference for you? And why is the projection different than with other players with similar profiles from previous years?
He's a fascinating case study, and I think I held so many different positions on him throughout the season with the more viewings I got. I don't know if there's a single player that I watched more video on than Gabe Perreault, just because he made me want to tear my hair out in terms of not understanding or struggling in how to rank him based off of weighing his projection and the skill. And it's just two very, very different things. Gabe Perreault was among the most skilled, most intelligent, most electrifying players in the entire draft class. This is a player who can probably outthink every single draft eligible in 2023, not named Bedard or Michkov.
Yeah.
And he has the handling skill to match, truly elite skill. He is a tremendous playmaker, incredibly deceptive. In the offensive zone, he is really, really fun. That said, I do think that he benefited a lot from his situation. He is a player that, despite all of his skill and handling ability, is at his best when not touching the puck too much. He is great off the puck to finding soft ice in the offensive zone, but he's the type of player that is a bit of a conduit on his line rather than like the puck carrier. And that really benefited him in that context of playing with Will Smith and Ryan Leonard. But it brings some question marks on how he will project when he's not playing with those two specific players that really facilitate his style of play. He's also he's a poor skater. That is one of the biggest question marks in his projection, and I think you and I definitely agree on that. It's a poor stride, lacks power, he lacks strength. The combination of lacking physicality and skating as a small player is concerning in terms of projection. For sure. That said, I ranked him 21st overall. I think that the risk is worthwhile because I think the upside is a complimentary first-line player who can match the intelligence of pretty much any player in the league on first lines. So I liked the pick for the Rangers. I was surprised by it. I did not expect New York to be the team to like swing on him. But he did fall a little bit further than I expected him to, because we were seeing some NHL sources saying like this is a top 10 talent for sure. And he didn't go top 10. And I think in the end, he went a lot closer to where I would have been comfortable taking him. So I thought that was an excellent pick for New York. Definitely a risk. He's not a guaranteed NHLer, let alone a guaranteed star. But the upside here is really significant.
For sure. No, I definitely agree. And I think that he complements a guy like Brennan Othmann really well in terms of skill sets. You've got a guy like Brennan Othmann in the system who is probably one of the best goal scorers outside of the NHL. I mean, his shot is ridiculously heavy and accurate. And on top of that, he's one of the best at shooting off receptions. Very, very quick release and doesn't need a perfect pass to set it up and shoot it, which is just, it's awesome to see him go about it. There's a reason he's played with the likes of Connor Bedard and et cetera at international tournaments. He's just a very, very solid player in terms of what he brings to the game. And, you know, for me, that combination is what puts him slightly ahead of the other two, the other team that we've mentioned so far in Edmonton. There's also a couple other guys that I really, really like. Like I think Adam Shikora's pickup in the second round last year was probably one of the best pickups of last year's draft. I'm a huge fan of his game. Probably the best for me, was the best defensive player in the 2022 draft.
Wow.
Like I like Yuri Kulik. I like what he brings to the game, but for me, Adam Shikora is
defensive forward or defensive player.
Oh yeah, no, defensive forward.
Okay, yeah, I was like defensive player. I was like, that is a hot take, but
no, not at all. It's really just, you know, in terms of defensive forwards.
Yeah,
I've never seen a player say to the media when they ask him what his favorite part of hockey is, respond with penalty killing and blocking shots. That was his answer to insane. Media. His mindset is ridiculous defensively, and that's one thing I really like out of Shikora. But Shikora is one of those guys that I feel like you can plug into a bottom six extremely well, and they'll project really well. But I don't see his skill set beyond that. It's just when you're that good defensively, you can rely on that exclusively and become a fantastic defensive forward at the NHL level, the type of guy that wins cups for your team. There's a couple other guys like Brett Berard, who I think has a very alluring skill set. He's a very skillful, very dynamic, and very energetic player. The intensity's off the charts. Yeah. And you've got guys like Will Cooley as well, I think is really interesting in terms of the profile that he brings to the game, a great playmaker and connector. But they don't have a player who I feel is complete enough that you can for sure see them have a complete 200-foot effort level, 200-foot game, and be able to produce offensively. I don't think they have any of that. Perreault is certainly not that. Othmann is certainly not that. Bryce McConnell-Barker being their best center in terms of prospects is not good.
That's not ideal. He's not a great skater. He's a bit limited in what he can do. I think best case scenario, you get a bottom 6 guy, maybe, because the playmaking's good, but everything else to me is a bit of a question mark with BMB.
I do like the shot though. I can't.
The shot's good.
I'd be remiss in not mentioning that.
It's heavy, but he needs so much space to get it off, which to me is just concerning in terms of projection. But
no, exactly.
I think,
and I don't necessarily see. I don't necessarily see any goaltenders in their pool as well that really kind of allure me. Olaf Lindblom was interesting when he got drafted, but it's been a rough time for him so far. He's been a sub 900 save percentage goaltender in the ECHL this year, which is
not ideal.
Yeah, and defensively, it's kind of getting empty now that Braden Schneider and Zach Jones are considered graduates. So that's what leaves them outside. But really, in terms of the forwards they have, it is pretty interesting. They have a lot of individual pieces with very particular skill sets, complementary skill sets, but they don't have a player. Wingers. Exactly. No centers that are really showing interest. I mean, Ryder Korczak is fine as well. It's just, for me, the main issue with them is the lack of center depth, the lack of defense depth, and the lack of goaltending depth, because they're good on wingers for the next 10 years. But like I mentioned, all their wingers have different skill sets and none of them overlap. I don't see Brennan Othmann ever contributing defensively, Gabe Perreault either. I don't see Brennan Othmann developing playmaking like Gabe Perreault's. I don't see Adam Shakura developing neither the playmaking nor the goal scoring of Gabe Perreault or Brennan Othmann. They have no overlap in terms of the prospects they have, which is very weird for me.
Yeah.
But listen, Gabe Perreault was the best and is the best NTDP scorer in the program's history. So we got to keep that in consideration, and that's why they edge out Edmonton. Is just the talent they have and the upside they have. Edmonton just simply doesn't have.
For sure.
So that's kind of the difference maker for us. Any other prospects you'd like to mention and kind of talk about?
Kalle Väisänen is kind of cool. I enjoy watching him play, especially internationally. He's kind of a wacky, massive winger, but he has good puck protection mechanics and decent hands. And when he has his small flashes of dynamism and brilliance, it brings me joy. He's fun in those little flashes. But in terms of NHL projection, I don't know if he's really worth too much of a mention here.
Yeah, me neither. Exactly. So that wraps things up for the New York Rangers prospect pool. Now we're going to go into the Vancouver Canucks prospect pool, break down their new addition from this year. Pretty controversial one, but also pretty interesting. We'll talk about some of the depth in their prospect pool. We'll get back into it on this episode of Locked On NHL Prospects. Alrighty, so let's get into Vancouver's prospect pool. Now, they made a pretty controversial ad in last year's draft at 11th overall. I don't know if I would have picked him 11th, but I definitely like the player in Tom Willander.
Yeah.
Willander is, for me, outside of, if you were looking for David Reinbacher and David Reinbacher was gone, Tom Willander is a great consolation prize if you're looking for a projectable, good rush defending, great skating, right-handed defenseman with decent size. I've always come away impressed with every viewing of Willander. I had him in my top 20 and I was very comfortable with that. But I know you had him very, very high. I think you had him one notch below Reinbacher or right above.
One notch above, but that was more of a statement ranking than I think they were a toss-up. I kind of just wanted to I wanted to give a little push on Willander because he'd been ranked below Reinbacher for the entire season, and I kind of just wanted to make a little statement on my belief in him. I ranked him 15th overall. I think that in Willander, the Canucks are getting a future top 4 right shot defenseman who is already tremendously well-rounded and so projectable. But I also think that he has some significant growing room left ahead of him, where he could really unlock some intriguing offensive potential that could really raise that upside to maybe a number 2 level. So he's a player whose game is really built on his mobility, intelligence, and defensive responsibility. He is really smart. He keeps really tight gaps. He has great footwork. He can match forwards footwork with ease going backwards.
Absurd skating. It's ridiculous.
The skating is a real asset, and I think it could be a separating tool at the NHL level if it continues on his current trajectory. He with the puck, he's a really strong passer. He finds really good lanes. He creates lanes for himself when he's in movement. When he's not in movement, he can be a bit more deer in the headlights. So he has to work on that a little bit. Inside the offensive zone, there are flashes of him wanting to create, but he's hesitant to really pinch above the hash marks. That said, this is the player that's going to be playing with Lane Hutson this season. He's going to learn how to activate offensively, just like Lane Hutson's likely going to learn how to pivot more effectively. I think that those two players are going to complement each other's growth tremendously well. And honestly, I think that BU is a tremendous place for Willander to be. Great as Rögle is as a development place, I don't know. Is it better than being able to play with Lane Hutson? I'm not sure.
I would take Rögle above anything, honestly, most of the time.
Rögle is excellent. For sure.
They're a fantastic program. I do agree, though, that having Lane Hutson on your pair...
it'll be Cole Hutson after that.
Exactly. Especially for a player as particular in terms of what he needs to learn as Willander, and having him play with Hutson, who has such a particular style as well, and have them both have weaknesses that the other has as a strength. It's just it's perfect.
They're very complementary.
Exactly.
Very. And
beyond that, it's just for sure that one's going to learn from the other. That's for sure. I mean, both of them are smart enough in order to study the other's game, appreciate what they do well, and incorporate that, which is just going to be very interesting to watch. I'd be very interested in seeing how far Willander comes in the areas that are missing in his game, just by pure result of being on Lane Hutson's line and studying him every day.
And his development curve too. I thought Willander improved so much in the late run of last season.
Oh, for sure.
There's a reason that he was rocking up everyone's board, and it wasn't just that his U18 performance was amazing. It was his regular season games were equally impressive, and he was really, really improving as the year was going on. And I thought that he was getting a lot closer to ASP than I thought that he would throughout. Asani Pellikka, who went to Detroit. Who went a bit later, but who, in my opinion, was the better of the two players. But I do think it was a lot closer than many other public scouts may have thought.
For sure.
That said, I can't quite rationalize picking Willander over a guy like Zach Benson. However, I don't think that he is at all a bad pick or a reach at 11. I thought it was a perfectly fine selection. I know a lot of people were really, really skeptical about it, but I'm a really big believer in Willander and think that he's a tremendous prospect.
Absolutely. So am I. It's just the thing that stings is exactly that. It's the fact that Zach Benson was right there, because any day of the week you take Benson above Willander for me, and it's just the fact that he was available that muddles things, and that's really the thing that stings, especially for Canucks fans, is just the fact that they missed out on one of the most projectable players out of this draft, in Zach Benson. It's very interesting to me that they went in this direction, but at the same time, I understand the desire to complement Quinn Hughes on the top line eventually. And I feel like if you develop Willander correctly, that's what you're getting out of him. It's a perfect complement to Quinn Hughes. But time will tell with him, and especially with Benson, who, even though he's projectable, might need a bit of time in order to convince.
He needs more time than Willander. Willander's more refined.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And it's just, that's the main thing that kind of separates the two. And I think that, I understand the argument for the Canucks staff in terms of taking Willander above him. It's just, for me, you never pick for need in the top 15 of the draft, you always pick the best player available. And for me, it was by far Zach Benson.
I agree.
But time will tell with that. I did want to talk about another right-handed defenseman that the Canucks selected in last year's draft, in Hunter Brzustewicz. Brzustewicz is a guy I've watched a lot over the last year and a half. What you're getting out of Brzustewicz is a very, very good breakout passer and puck mover. You know, in terms of profile, you're getting a puck-moving defenseman for sure out of Brzustewicz. That's what you're going to try to develop out of him. The issue with Brzustewicz, and it's the main thing that kept him outside of my first round, even though he was there sporadically in the bottom half, in the bottom kind of tier of my first round at the start of the year, was the more I watched him, the more I saw a lot of very concerning passiveness. I thought it was just a bit of inconsistency because he did show some flashes of it at the start of the year, but the more I watched him, the more I realized that 90% of the time, he's not activating. He's not necessarily rushing into gaps to close them. He's not reading the game in order to understand exactly when to push the pace, because all he's trying to do is sit back and let the play develop so he can kind of react to play, which is not what you want out of a very good skating kind of puck moving guy. You want him tracking back hard, closing gaps early. That's what you want out of your puck moving defenseman. And that's, for me, Brzezewicz's biggest weakness. And that's what makes him a bit harder to project, is that his biggest weakness is an area that you absolutely need as a puck mover. So for me, that's the main thing with Brzustewicz. And I've been impressed with some viewings of him, especially with the ability to manipulate lanes, to read those second or third passing lanes that other defensemen that don't necessarily read. That's been pretty interesting to me, but he'll need a lot of work in terms of his defensive projectability, in terms of his gap control, his rush defending, in order to be as effective a puck mover as he is on the puck. Because the moment he loses it, it's a bit of a deer in the headlight situation. So that's one thing that really needs to improve. Other than him, I think the addition of Aatu Raty to this prospect pool really helps the Canucks.
For sure.
That trade, I feel like they came away, pretty decently, trading away a player who probably wasn't going to resign for them anyway, and getting definitely the best prospect in the Isles pool, which is, it's not saying much, but still.
But true, yeah.
Yeah. So what's your read on round 2 so far? I know he dropped a lot in his draft here. He went in the second round, and since then he's proved a lot of people wrong, right?
I think I had him ranked around 14th overall that year. Yeah. I definitely thought he was a clear first-round talent. That said, his progression as a D+1 was hilarious to me, because I was kind of for my I think I had like 3 viewings of him in his draft year, which was less than most public scouts. I was still getting into it, but yeah, I like what I saw. I thought I saw a really intelligent, defensively responsible centerman who had a really good shot, but didn't always know how to use it, and was expected to be the superstar when he just isn't. He's a subtly effective, good player. So I think the superstar expectation on him in his draft year really weighed on him, because it just isn't how he plays the game.
No, exactly.
However, at this point in time, I continue liking his projection a lot. I still think he projects as a middle 6 centerman. His intelligence has continued to progress. I think that he's continued to improve his decision-making speed, and he's translated to North America very, very well. The production hasn't been the most consistent throughout his time in the AHL, but I have liked the viewings that I've gotten, and some of them have been in passing, but as a whole, it's been very, very positive. So this isn't a player that is going to be the savior of the Canucks franchise, but he's a really solid prospect, and to get a middle 6 projected center as a piece of that Bo Horvat return, I think was excellent business.
Absolutely. And a quick word for me on Jonathan Lekkerimaki, who for me after the draft showed a lot of the issues that I was concerned with in his draft year, and that led me to rank him in kind of the bottom half of the 20 range rather than the top 15 ranking that he was on a lot of boards. For me, Lekkerimaki doesn't have a B game. If his scoring doesn't translate, it's not going to work out for him. And it's so far in his draft plus 1 year in the Allsvenskan, which is a lower level than he was playing in his draft year, it's been difficult for him. He did have a decent amount of goals, but for me, it's just when you watch the actual games themselves and see how it breaks down, and just the lack of involvement defensively, the lack of playmaking game, I wasn't as impressed with what Lekkerimaki was able to do at the Allsvenskan level.
It was a really weird season for him, though, because he had 3 goals and 9 points in the Allsvenskan in 29 games, and then during the qualification for the SHL, he went in with 5 goals and 15 points in 15 games. Like
It's
he definitely stepped it up, and I think
Mhm.
I think the reality for him is somewhere in between those two productions. But there's also a player that I had ranked, I think 26th to 28th overall in 2022. So like you, I was a bit more of a skeptic on the goal scoring. I like a guy like Joakim Kamel a lot more just because he had the B game of the physicality and the checking game. Whereas with Lekkerimaki, yes, he is a strong handler and has a ridiculous shot. But as you said, there isn't that fallback game. And especially with Vancouver, like who would he be playing with in the NHL that could complement him really, really well? Like
that's the thing.
If the Canucks had a high-end playmaking center coming up that wasn't Elias Pettersson, I'd be a lot more hopeful because I think that there'd be a better fit there. But as of right now, I'm more hopeful now than I was like maybe 4 or 5 months ago when he was like in like the deep, dark, no production time in the Allsvenskan. But I still have a couple doubts, especially considering where he's drafted.
Absolutely. And a quick word on just a shout out really on some of the players that we haven't mentioned. I think Elias Pettersson, the other one, the defenseman, is looking really good in terms of the production. I feel like he's going to become a very good rush defender at the NHL level, probably number 5, number 6. I'm not convinced of the top 4 potential, but you never know. And a couple other guys in Aidan McDonough and Arshdeep Bains, who I've really liked watching tape of, especially McDonough in his final year in the NCAA was really impressive. He's had a decent development and has played 6 games in the NHL, scored a goal, looking pretty good so far. And one more in Damon Gardner, who I really like as a defensive center type of player. We haven't mentioned Danila Klimovich, but I'm kind of on and off on him. I've fluctuated really on my read of him. But those are kind of the players that we find interesting enough, and there's enough depth in multiple areas in the Canucks prospect pool that they outrank the Rangers and Oilers for us. But that wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment saying what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. Now, for your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today for all your news about what's going on in the sporting world. And for our next episode, we'll be going through the picks 23 through 21 of our countdown to the best prospect pool in the NHL. So this has been Hadi Kalakesh with Sebastian and Hadi, and we hope you tune in next time.